Hello and welcome to the Climbing Daily Friday Gear Show. Today we're going to be asking the question, do you need a beginner's climbing shoe? We're going to be looking at climbing shoes in general, what makes a beginner shoe, the pros and cons of it, and why, in my opinion, you should upgrade almost straight away. So you've just started climbing. You go into your local wall and you notice that no one is using trainers for climbing. They've got specialised shoes that are different, that are used, unsurprisingly, for climbing. So what's the differences? Well, this is Hugo's trainers. Thank you very much, Hugo. As you can see, it's a very wide profile, it's got a squidgy sole, and it's all very movable and bendable. This is a climbing shoe. You can see it's got a much lower profile to the whole thing. The sole is made entirely of rubber, and there's extra bits of rubber around the heel and toe sections. The bottom is flat, although sometimes climbing shoes can be downturned, and the whole thing is designed to push you off small footholds, either on rock or plastic, and encase your foot so it doesn't move. Very different from a trainer. Now, when you start climbing, you're going to hear a lot of people tell you you need a beginner shoe. So what is a beginner shoe? Climbing shoes tend to be split. There's beginner shoes, intermediate shoes, and advanced shoes that tend to be for a specific genre of climbing. Beginner shoes tend to be a little bit more comfortable. The fit is looser. Now, lots of climbers, including me, tend to buy our shoes small so that the toes are crimped up in the toe box section. That means that you can lay lots of power through your toes and it's very precise. All of your body weight is into your cramped up toes and you can move very easily off small footholds. Now, an example of a beginner shoe is this, La Sportiva Tarantula. As you can see, flatter profile, not particularly downturned, quite a comfy looking fit, but still with that La Sportiva quality that we expect. Now, when you buy your first pair of beginner shoes, you are looking for that tightness, but not that crimped up toe feel. That's because when you first start climbing, your footwork isn't necessarily going to be on point. You're going to be kicking around on the wall and not being particularly precise. And trust me, if you're kicking the wall and your toes are scrunched up, that really hurts. Comfort is the key. Now, although you want to avoid that crimped toe look, you do want your shoes to be tight, and you don't want any dead space between your foot and the lining. That's because if your shoe fits like a glove, your foot won't move around in the shoe. If your foot's moving around in the shoe, that means your foot is moving around on the hole and you're going to fall off, and it also doesn't build much confidence. So that's the fit covered. Now, most beginner shoes tend to have an incredibly flat profile. This is the Black Diamond Momentum and is a very good beginner shoe. Now, compare this with the Black Diamond Zone and you can see a real difference in the shape and the arch of the climbing shoe. For a more advanced shoe, you want that downturn so you can hook your feet almost like hands over the holds. That downturn allows more precision and more power into the toe box of the shoe and allows you better heel hook potential. It is more advanced, but it will help you on the rock. But just to slightly complicate matters, having a progression in climbing skill doesn't mean you necessarily go straight into those downturned shoes. For example, this is the 510 Blanco, a very high-end sport climbing shoe. These things have climbed up to 9A, I think, even higher with some pro climbers. But as you can see, it's a completely flat profile. That's because some type of climbing suits flatter shoes, especially sport roots with small limestone nubbins in them. The stiffness and flatness of the sole gives you support to your foot. So if you're standing right on the end, you feel the support all the way through. With a floppier shoe, let's say back to this Black Diamond Momentum, that will bend a little bit in the middle because the rubber isn't as thick and isn't as isn't as stiff as the Blanco. So don't think just because you get better, you have to have something ridiculously overhanging and downturned like this. As we discussed at the beginning of the show, climbing shoes have a rubber sole, and the rubber changes between different brands. Sometimes they buy in the rubber to add to their outer of the shoe. For example, La Sportiva use Vibram, Wild Country use Continental, and Soil have their own dark matter rubber. Generally, rubber in climbing shoes is split into soft and stiff. You get stiffer soled climbing shoes like the Blanco we talked about before if you want to stand on small edges and give support to your foot, while a softer rubber, for example the one used on these bouldering shoes, the Mad Rock Drone, this is softer because it allows you to bend and flex and hook your foot and really sort of smear it onto those holds. If you're new to the climbing shoe world and you're getting into this new experience of rubber, then be aware that climbing shoe rubber does not last very long. It's different from the rubber on a pair of trainers that are designed to walk for miles over different types of terrain. The rubber on climbing shoes is a lot softer and is designed for only one thing. So don't be disappointed if your first pair of climbing shoes don't last that long. Consider 3 to 6 months as a pretty good run on them, and some last a bit less and some will last a bit more, but they're not bomb-proof, these things. Now that moves quite nicely into the rubber on beginner shoes, because the rubber on beginner shoes tends to be a bit thicker. For example, the La Sportiva Gecko has 5mm of rubber in it, compared to the very soft and very advanced Scarpa Furia S, which only has 3.5mm of rubber, and you can really see the difference. So why do you have a thicker rubber on a beginner shoe? Well, because it needs to stand up to more abuse. As we said earlier, you're going to be kicking into the wall, you're not going to be very precise with your footwork, and you're going to be scraping around a bit. All of that kind of footwork puts a lot of pressure on the rubber, and if you do that thing on a 3.5mm rubber, you're going to go through it in a matter of weeks, whereas if you do that on a 5mm rubber, it's going to last longer. You want durability as a beginner, both value for money and just for your own confidence when you're on the wall. Just to big up the La Sportiva Gecko a little bit more, it is a very good beginner shoe and indoor climbing shoe. That's because the whole thing is washable. You just lob it into the washing machine and it won't damage the shoe. And it's also got this special rubber on it, meaning it won't mark the hold. So a lot of black rubber, you see big scrapes down a climbing wall, whereas the Gecko doesn't leave those marks. Not necessarily important for you as the climber, but if you're a climbing wall, then that's kind of useful. So you'll see Geckos at lots of indoor climbing gyms. So the main thing I want to leave you with for this section is that it's all about comfort with a beginner climbing shoe, but you can overdo that. For example, these Black Diamond Momentums are Hugo's, and I know that when he got them, they fitted him nicely and were very comfortable, but climbing shoes stretch. So the more he wore them, the bigger they got, and eventually they got to that stage where they were just too big and too floppy for climbing. So do be aware of that. Also, comfort doesn't necessarily mean a drop in performance. So my 510 Quantum shoes, again, a very advanced shoe, but man, they are comfortable. My feet fit perfectly into it, it's not too scrunched, and there's a lovely microfiber on the inside. Comfort on all levels of climbing shoe, whether you're a beginner or an advanced climber, is important. So this now goes on to the main sort of talking point of this show, which is, do you need a beginner shoe in the first place? What's to stop you just jumping straight into that intermediate shoe market? The problem with beginner shoes is they lack in advanced features. For example, better shoes have clever rand design, they have amazing heel systems, or power patches under the toes. There's lots of things packed into a high-end shoe that you don't necessarily get with a beginner shoe. See it a bit like this. If you want to compete in Formula 1 at the highest level, you're not going to bring an 80s banger car. You're going to bring something high-end, and that's kind of the same in climbing shoes. But a more advanced shoe doesn't mean you're automatically going to be a brilliant climber. And also, a worse shoe doesn't make you a worse climber. If you gave Adam Ondra a pair of these Momentums, I bet you he still climbs 9A. He's quality, and it doesn't matter what shoes you wear. So should you skip that beginner phase and jump into an intermediate shoe, like the La Sportiva Katana or the Scarpa Vapor V? Maybe. The problem is are you going to use these advanced features? When you first start climbing, everything is new. You've suddenly got to learn rope work, footwork, hand work, you're training, you're with people. It's all a bit much, and all you're really doing in those first couple of months is learning the basics. Having a shoe that can take you up 9As is great, but you're not going to need that kind of technology. And more than likely, you're going to wear through them very, very quickly. So I reckon it's better to start with that entry-level model to get you through that initial stage. You need to consider price with all this as well. Beginner shoes tend to be better value than advanced climbing shoes. For For example, the EB Neo starts at only €49 and is an absolute bargain. Compare that to the top of the range Black Diamond Shadow, which is about €182, and you can really see the difference in price. If you just started climbing, you're going to have a lot of new costs. You might have to buy harnesses, gym memberships. It's expensive. And if you just started, you don't know if climbing is going to be the passion of your life. It might just be something you do a few times a month. And in that case, it's worth going for the slightly cheaper shoe rather than blowing all your money on an advanced model. Just to throw another spanner into this climbing shoe situation, should you rent a pair of shoes? I mean, there must be an argument for that. You rent a pair of shoes until you know what you like and you get through that first phase of being rubbish, and then you buy an intermediate or advanced shoe. Maybe, but a lot of rental shoes are just awful. They go to hundreds of different people, the fit is baggy, loose and terrible, the rubber is patched, it's got holes in it. Rental shoes are great for that first ever time climbing, but very quickly you'll feel the limitations, and I reckon getting a rental shoe long term is actually going to put you off the sport, and you want as much excitement as possible because what we do is pretty fantastic. So personally, avoid the rental shoes. For that price, that €49 we were talking about, that's actually only about 3 or 4 times you can rent a shoe. In London, it's about £7 to £10 to rent a shoe. You do that a few times and you might as well have bought that beginner model. Okay, so that's climbing shoes, beginner and advanced covered. What's my opinion on what you should do? I do think beginner shoes are important, and when you're buying it, think fit, not features. Try them on at your local climbing wall, chat to other climbers, see what works for them and get a little bit of advice. You can always try them on, get the perfect fit and buy them online if you want, although it is sometimes nice to support your local climbing wall. Get a pair of shoes for that first phase of climbing. Learn some technique. Get all that information in and then move on, because very quickly that beginner shoe, you're just going to outgrow them. It's funny looking back at my first pair of climbing shoes, and at the time I thought it was amazing, super sticky, really active and really downturn, aggressive, and I look now and it's just flat and loose and a bit rubbish. You very quickly move on and you need a shoe that's going to help you with your progression. Buying your next step-up shoe is an exciting moment, and by that time you should have worked out what kind of climbing you want to do. Are you more into bouldering? In that case, look for something like the Mad Rock Drone. Do you want a very stiff shoe for sport climbing? Again, the Blancos is a great choice. Or if you want an all-round model, something like the Boreal Mutant is brilliant. It all depends on the type of climbing you're going to do. Now what I've done is I've put my own personal 3 favourite beginner shoes and 3 favourite intermediate shoes in the description below, and you can buy them from the EpicTV shop, and it's just a little idea of where I'd go if I was buying those shoes. There's also a link to all of our beginner shoes if you want to have a massive browse of everything. There isn't an exact science to this. This is always, with the gear show, kind of my opinion and what I've learned over the years, but do let me know your opinions. Which was your first beginner shoe? Did you like it? Did it work for you? And how quickly did you upgrade? And I'd also be interested in hearing from people who immediately went for that intermediate shoe. Did you just know you were going to be brilliant at climbing and you wanted the top end model? Let me know in the description below. That's it for today. Thanks for listening to me. Thanks for watching Climbing Daily, and I'll see you next week.